automobile industry, right? That's perhaps the top one right now. Automobile and EVs, if I would say, that's contributing one major problem to our current environment system, in fact. Second, and that actually is linked to the automobile industry already. Okay. Fossil fuel combustion, crude oil and oil, we would call it petroleum industry. How about mining? Mining, even better than gold, I would say. Coal is perhaps quite behind in the list right now. The top mining elements or minerals countries are looking for: lithium, all the metals that they use for making of all these batteries. So mining industry at large, but in that, lithium, cadmium, all these precious metals which are used to make all these electronic vehicles these days, their search and exploration is far ahead of any other sort of alternatives. So mining industry. And at least one more. There are many other, but we can add one more at least. Electronics will keep it in that list. You're saying like cattle industry and all that. Yes, that's also part. But one major industry that's sort of a major problem to our environment is plastic polymer industry, isn't it? Polymer industry. Now, all these major industries, in fact, are linked to some sort of major product that we use in our everyday life. For example, if you could tell me what sort of material polymer plastic has replaced in the last few decades, if I would say. Like what type of materials do you think plastic or polymer has replaced? Yes, please.
Paper bag.
Paper bag or plastic is the material that we are using. Plastic has replaced two major type of material humans were using in last century. Very common, very easy. Wood, iron. Now, in a way, this thing is good for our environment, that plastic has replaced the use of wood. All these chairs, furniture, plastic, apparently they look like wood, but they're actually mixed plastic. Fiber wood mixed with polymer plastic, and that's how we make them, right? All these houses, different type of joyland play areas for the kids, utensils and things in the kitchen that we use there, they have been replaced from metals to plastic and pyrex these days. Automobile में, electronics में, fossil fuel को replace करने के लिए scientists are looking for alternate, and now they finally found all these, batteries and alternate energy sources, no doubt. Petroleum and crude oil industry will always be there. It's very hard to replace it with any alternate energy source. That is because it's a kind of fuel that is under the ground, and you just take it out from the ground and use it. But any other fuel, you have to first perhaps sort of try to make it first, and then you sort of use it later, right? Okay, so after this, I will want you to try and think of certain substances or chemicals which are linked to direct environmental pollution towards the earth and globe. So we list the chemicals or substances which are causing pollution. These are not very hard to identify, especially like in countries like South Asia, Pakistan. We're having some chemicals or substances. As chemistry student, I want you to identify oxides of nitrogen and sulfur, right? So oxides of sulfur and nitrogen. Any other chemical that's or any substance has to place which is causing environmental problems. One is very common. Yes, carbon dioxide can also be there, but other than that, that's not a gas mode. CFC is also a part of it, is chlorofluorocarbons, which are harmful, but one very common you guys are missing actually. Just this plastic, isn't it? So plastic is the major substance or chemical that come from direct industrial growth and revolution. These things actually are sort of not the ones which are in public sight in general, right? But plastic is something that everyone is using and everyone is contributing towards that environmental problem of plastic as such. So there is this, all this plastic that we use eventually end up in the water system. Very less goes into the landfills. The plastic ends up in the landfill, that's not a problem. But when it goes into water system, streams, rivers, it eventually ends up in the ocean. And you know there is this famous Pacific garbage patch that is floating around the Pacific Ocean. And there are many studies, and perhaps 5 years ago they said that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is about twice the size of Texas already. So it's getting even bigger. And initially people did not believe it that such a kind of thing would be there in the ocean. But now scientists know it through satellite imagery, they know its exact size, and now they're planning to sort of find out the ways by which they can remove it somehow or make it less harmful for the big animal like whale fish and all. Small fish does not eat such big plastic, but whale fish sometimes, and the big fish, they sort of mistake these kind of things as prey and they gulp it, and most of the fish and whale that die on the seashore, that is because of that huge plastic patch floating around in the ocean. Okay, so we have identified the main industries which are causing us the problems. These are the chemical substances which are in form of pollution we are facing. Now I want you to try and list the impact of global environment, like pollution or climate change. So what are the visible climate change indicators that we can find out around us? Like because of the industrial growth, because of all these harmful substances, what are the visible climate or environmental changes we are seeing or facing? Yes, please. Melting of glaciers, yes. In the last 2 weeks, perhaps you should have seen, especially in our north region, so many examples have come out because of the impact of all these things. So the worst thing would be glaciers melting. And what else? Yes, please. Rising temperature because of the CO2 or methane gases. Rising temperature. What else? What we have in winters in Lahore, for example, smog. That's one environmental impact. and that would actually be, enough to drown or sink the smaller island countries, Maldives, Malaysian islands, and so many other places where we have rising sea level problems. So the industry, the harmful substances and things that they give us and their visible impact on the environment. Now I want you to think about what we can do at small level and then what government should do at large scale. That's way forward. Any possible things that we can sort of list out here and keep it simple, way forward. What are the things that we can use to prevent all these things, or at least make them slow, at least? Yes, please. We need to plant trees, yes. What else? Limited use, recycle, reuse, right? The famous 3R. So we should try and go to the 3Rs. Reduce, reuse, recycle as much as possible. For plastic, we can do that. What else? These are micro level, tips. Yes, please. We need to look for alternative energy sources other than the fossil fuel. These things are very important, but they do not interestingly create very large impact. All these things that we have listed here, they're happening in countries like Pakistan, which have hardly anything to contribute towards the environmental pollution. So we are the victim. We are not the ones who are causing this. Interestingly, the countries who are causing this are least affected by the environmental changes, even in next 100 years, because of their geological placing and position. Pakistan has, for example, more than 10,000 glaciers, and hardly 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature would make most of these glaciers to melt fast. And these flash floods that you people have seen or witnessed these days, unfortunately, they will increase drastically every year, and we might not have any glaciers in that village, right? So, what we need to do at small scale in countries like Pakistan and governments like Pakistan, third world countries, we need to push really strongly towards the international community and make them realize that they are not doing any favor to the global, because if they are not affected now or 100 years from now, one day they will be affected, right? Because the entire ecosystem, the way things are going on, they can't, go smoothly if few parts of the world are affected that way. So we need to push forward to United Nations, force these countries to seriously adopt the changes they pledge for, right? They say we would reduce the carbon dioxide emission and everything, and above all, they need to finance countries who are struggling the most with the climate change, right? So this is a really important part. These developed countries who have resources and they are least affected by all these changes, if they step forward and take up the responsibility to really make big change. So that can be done at large scale, right? So at the end, I want you to sort of think of any 2 or 3 questions that come in your mind from this entire discussion or debate. Any question that you would bring up, please. No question perhaps at this stage, no worries. Any small scale change that you would want to bring in your life that would reduce your carbon footprint, carbon footprint, right? So any small change that you would try and follow, that could be very easy. Try switching towards the EVs instead of driving petrol vehicles, for example. Trying to avoid using plastic whenever possible, paper bags, maybe, and trying and not that would